and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. As a crew member of an AC-47, Brian Parker says he could not buy a drink anywhere while on active duty in Vietnam. You see, AC-47s went about the business of saving lives, and it was the pleasure of those survivors to pick up the tab. When ground troops were surrounded by the enemy, it was the AC-47 gunship that came to the rescue, lighting up the area with flares and bullets. Brian Parker was a navigator in Nam for 12 months, just part of his 21 years of military service, and it is our pleasure to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker to Veterans of the Valley. Lieutenant Colonel Parker, it is an honor to have you and talk about your Vietnam War experience. You served 21 years in the military, but let's go back before it ever started. You were in the very first graduating class of the United States Air Force Academy, came over there from Baltimore. Sort of talk about what got you from Baltimore to Colorado to the Air Force Academy.
Well, when I graduated from high school, I really didn't care to go into education anymore.
Right.
And I had applied for a West Point appointment, and that didn't come through. I think some big football player got the job. So I went to work for a friend, digging ditches and doing roofing. And by the end of the summer, I thought, you know, there must be something better in life than, see, at that time we didn't have the ditch diggers. We did it with a shovel. And I remembered that the track coach at the University of Maryland during the Maryland relays had come up to me. We had won the relays, and he said, if you ever decide you want to go to college, come give me a call. Well, I did in August. And 2 years at the University of Maryland, the ROTC instructor said, they're starting a new academy out in Colorado. Would you like to go? And I said, well, that sounds great. What do I do? And he led me through the paperwork and talked to the senators and congressmen, and I had an appointment. Then I started running my chin in real strong. And it was kind of like they do out here at the Corps for the fish.
Right. What was the Air Force Academy like as it was just getting started, a brand new school?
It was just temporary buildings. But I had no complaints with that. I had never had my own room, and I had a room with a roommate and a rifle rack and book rack and a desk, and everything was just fine for us. So it was fun, I thought.
Indeed. Air Force Academy, you went on some field trips while you were there to the Far East, and that's where you first got exposed to the 13th Bomb Squadron, and you were really enamored by that, weren't you?
As I was growing up, we lived in Baltimore, and the Martin plant was there manufacturing the B-57, which was the Canberra bomber. I said, boy, I'd like to fly that someday. And when we got to the 13th Bomb Squadron in Japan, there it was, the B-57. When I graduated from navigator school, I had a choice of B-52s or the B-57 in Japan. I thought, that's the way to go.
To the B-57. And you graduated from navigator school, one of the top 3 or 4 in the class, and therefore you got your choice pretty much of what you wanted to do, right?
That's right.
You went to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and that's where you were sort of introduced to the modern warfare that would be used in Vietnam.
After serving 4 years during the Cold War at Yokota in Japan, the wing was sent to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base. And there they said the navigator would probably not fly. They had to have a Vietnamese in the back seat. So I already had an assignment to the States. After 4 years, I said, well, I'll go back to the States. In the States then, I flew EC-121s out over the North Atlantic. About halfway through that tour, a very good friend of mine, Quincy Collins, was shot down and captured as a prisoner of war. I said, I've got to go back and do something. So I volunteered to go back in the B-57s. I had an expert rating, and the personnel people said, no problem, we'll get you over there. Then I was assigned to the AC-47.
That was a mess up.
I think so.
And that pretty much dictated the rest of your way in Vietnam. But you said it was a mess up, that it was an assignment that you enjoyed thoroughly.
It was a thoroughly rewarding, enjoyable assignment, knowing that you were saving somebody every time you were called out.
Right, right. I want you to talk more about that because we alluded to that in the introduction when we said that you couldn't go to get a drink and pay for one. Everybody wanted to buy your drinks because the people in Vietnam, the ground soldiers, were truly, for good reason, indebted to the AC-47 because of the ground cover and the support that they gave.
If we went into one of the bars where the Army troops were, they would, of course, find out that we were Air Force and say, "What's your call sign?" And we'd say Spooky 42 or whatever. And they'd say, "You can't buy a drink here." And we go, "Why not?" "Because we're buying."
Right.
And it was very rewarding. Even locally, when we were bringing some troops up from the Brooke Army Hospital to view a Aggie game, we had a transportation problem and called around, and Mr. Ed Cravey offered to provide a limo and a town car to show the wounded around town and take them to the game. It turns out Ed was in Vietnam the same time that I was, and he said I'd probably save his life.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's very rewarding to know.
The numbers are really amazing. I found this on the internet about the AC-47s under the record. From 1964 to 1969, the AC-47 successfully defended 3,926 hamlets, outposts, or forts. They fired over 97 million rounds, killed over 5,300 enemy soldiers. No outpost or village under gunship protection was ever lost to the enemy. That's a pretty fascinating record.
That's what made it so rewarding. When you talk to the guys on the radio going in, it was like they were bowing down to you and saying, "Thank goodness you're here." And we fired on the camps themselves. They said, "We're undercover, have at them." And we'd hose it down. They say they're going.
Right.
They're leaving.
And when they said that they were undercover, they really better mean it, because
Yes.
we were talking about the statistical nature of this aircraft, the AC-47. And talk more about that, about how many rounds you carried, how many rounds it would fire out of 3 guns, and sort of its coverage area is mind-boggling, really. Talk about that.
Well, we carried normally a load of 15,000 rounds, 15,500, something like that, and 40-some flares, depending upon whether we thought we were going to have a lighting mission or a gunning mission, or a combination. The normal load was about 40 and 15,000. The guns fired 6,000 rounds a minute per gun. So that's 100 rounds a second per
Right.
gun. If you put all 3 guns on, a 3-second burst will fill every square yard of a football field.
Wow, in 3 seconds.
Yeah. And you run out of ammo real quick if you do it that way. So
Right.
we normally only put 1 gun on until we were sure we had the right spot and the bad guys.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would also carry flares, anywhere upwards to 40, 45 flares in the plane. And talk about the flares and the job that they did. It would light up the area for the ground soldiers, right?
The flares were 2 million candle power. They'd burn for about 3 minutes, which meant we had to make a full circle and come back and drop again in 3 minutes to keep it continuously illuminated. We've been on targets where if the flare went out, they started the attack again. As soon as we dropped the flare, they'd stop the attack. And then when we knew where they were, of course, we'd put the guns online and have at them.
Right, right. And the flares would light up the area, you say, for about 3 minutes,
Yeah.
which was enough time for the ground soldiers to do their work to find their enemy, and that was the point of the whole thing.
Now, one time we were visited by some dignitaries, and somebody briefed the dignitary that we kept Saigon under light all night long.
Wow.
And that's not true.
Right?
So later we told
Just
them
seemed that way.
how much those flares cost, and
Right.
that they only lasted 3 minutes apiece. And they said, "Okay, only when needed."
Right. Now, the AC-47 was not involved in air-to-air combat. You said you think you might have shot down a plane once, but you're not sure that happened, but mainly it was air-to-ground.
No, our crew never shot down, but there is a story. It's probably one of the urban legends that
Right.
says they shot down something, but I don't think they did.
Because this plane would fly low, 2,500 to
Yeah.
3,000 feet, right?
Yeah, we could be shot down.
At a speed of about, what,
120 knots.
120 knots. So that was fairly slow and low.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And when you went into a circular pattern,
right?
and you fired out the left side of the aircraft, so it looked like a cone. And as you were looking at it from above, it looked like a dragon shooting down at the ground.
Right.
And that's how they got the name, the Magic Dragon.
Right. Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yes.
Right.
And the call sign was Spooky.
Exactly.
And there's a story behind that too.
What's that?
As the commander was taking off with a flight of Goonie birds to go to Vietnam, it was real foggy. And he said, boy, this is the spookiest thing I've ever seen. And after that, so the story goes, the call sign was Spooky.
Right. What, Lieutenant Colonel Parker, was it like, if you can go back that far, in the navigator? As a navigator, you sat behind the pilots, is that right? What do you recall as far as your fear factor, your thoughts about where you were, what you were doing? Most of these missions, I guess, were at night, right?
All our missions were at night.
Yeah, were at night. What personally were your thoughts about your own safety, your own mortality, what you were doing? You were a young guy.
At that time, we were all young. We were invincible.
Right.
On occasion, we weren't supposed to, but we would fly low over certain areas to see if we could draw ground fire. That's foolish, but we did it, and we survived, and we did draw some ground fire and fired back.
Right.
And I don't know, it was so rewarding that we never really had that fear factor, except one night, we saw all these explosions underneath of us.
Right.
We were flying just a cap around Saigon and Benoit Air Base. And I immediately got on the radio and called the Tactical Air Control Center, and they said, whoops, where are you? And we told them, and they said, we've lost you on the radar. You just survived a B-52 attack. So evidently we were just behind where the bombs were dropping, and if we'd have been a little bit ahead, we'd have been wiped out for sure. And the B-52s would have been able to say they took down an airplane.
Exactly, albeit the wrong one. You mentioned when we were talking the other day about your work in Intel, and I guess that came after your flying time in Vietnam. And also, I want you to talk about that, and also a situation where you were involved with Bud Day, who I looked up was actually the most highly decorated soldier of Vietnam, was a POW for some 67 months, Bud Day. Talk about your job in Intel and that.
Well, I volunteered to go back for another 6 months flying the Goonie bird, and personnel got into the act again and said we needed a target intelligence officer.
Right.
I said, I'm not a target intelligence officer. And he said, well, yes, you are. You went through the bomb school. When you look at photographs, so you're a target intelligence officer, and we have to have one up there. So I went up there, and I was the senior man as a captain because the lieutenant colonel had already left and he hadn't been replaced. My job then became briefing the commander, basically.
Right.
We worked with the OSI, we worked with the Koreans, we had undercover agents out in the field giving us information. I was on duty when Bud Day was shot down, and the junior officer came in and said, sir, we need you to pull the authenticator cards for Bud Day. They've been shot down. And that was, really gets to you.
Yes, sir.
And I've talked with Bud. We've exchanged a few Christmas cards, and
right.
He's doing good work now and trying to get the benefits for the retired people as promised. And I believe he's suing the government for something right now, but I'm not quite sure what it is. But we'll support him in that.
Indeed, indeed you will. Your crew won 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Talk about that and what led to that.
One night we got a call south of Saigon that some advisors were under attack with their group of Vietnamese, and they were having trouble seeing the enemy, and they were going to be overrun and all the good stuff that they tell you. We went out and started dropping flares. As soon as we started dropping the flares, the attack was broken, but as soon as we'd leave, it would start up again. So we stayed and coordinated the efforts of bringing other planes out, landing, refueling, getting more flares and getting back up, firing guns, and so on, until morning. And the good guys were saved again.
Right.
Another mission, an outpost was under attack. We went out, broke the attack. There were about 400 Vietnamese attacking the outpost. Confirmed reports were that we had 70 bodies, and the rest were either drug off or wounded or survived in some way.
Right.
But from our standpoint, we were not really going through a fear factor on that. We were just doing our job, but the guys on the ground were quite thankful and sent us lots of letters of recommendation, and they awarded us the Distinguished Flying Cross. And we always never accepted anything for just the pilot or the navigator or anybody. We accepted it for the whole crew.
Indeed.
Because they all did the job. Without them, we couldn't have done it.
Your crew of 7, we've got some photographs, and one of the photographs we're going to see is going to be your crew of 7. I want to go ahead and go to those photographs right now. Some of these are ones that were supplied by you. Some others I got off the internet. There you are. About how old of a airman are you right there?
I'm about 25 there. And that's in the B-57 in Japan.
I see.
I looked young, didn't I?
Yeah. This is a photograph that I got off the internet. It's actually a drawing. It's a sketching, so people can get an idea of the AC-47 and what it looked like. I guess this is the same plane that later became a passenger plane made by McDonnell Douglas, right? And became a passenger plane that was called, I guess, a Convair or a DC-3, I guess.
This is the old DC-3 that
Right.
we converted to a AC.
Uh-huh.
The fighters objected to it being called an FC because
Right.
they said it's not a fighter. So they changed it to AC, which is attack cargo.
And as you can see, the guns, so the 3 guns were all coming out of the left side of the plane, is that right?
One gun came out the cargo door,
Uh-huh.
and the other 2 came out the windows.
The windows right next to after the cargo door.
Well, forward of the cargo
Forward
door.
of the cargo door,
And
okay.
flying at 3,000 feet
Yeah.
in Vietnam got quite chilly.
This, as you can see, is labeled there, the AC-47 Spooky Gunship interior view. This is the gun bay of one. You can get
Yes.
sort of an idea of what it looked like on the inside of the ship.
That's the Gatling gun.
Mm-hmm.
It just spun around, fired electronically.
So each one of those, like we said, fired about
6,000 rounds a minute.
6,000 rounds a minute for about 18,000 rounds a minute because there were 3 guns coming out of it. Not a lot of interior decoration inside of those.
No, it's
those
not.
planes. This is a photograph of the outside at night of one of the guns firing, and I guess that's a pretty realistic view of what it looked like.
They had tracers interspersed between the regular rounds, which gave you a stream that looked like the dragon going after you.
Right.
And I think that was as scary as anything else for the guys on the ground that survived. Seeing that burst of fire coming at them, they didn't hang around very long in most cases.
I don't imagine. Okay, we'll move on to the next photograph. This is a photograph that you supplied of, I guess this is one of the AC-47s that, is this your plane or one that you flew?
We flew a lot of them.
You flew a lot of them, but that's still...
There were a total of 53 eventually in Vietnam. 15 were shot down or crashed or hit by a mortar round. We also had to contend with that because the Army was firing mortars and the Navy was firing salvos. We had to fly around them. I don't think any of our planes were hit by a mortar round, but we don't know what took some of them down.
They were tough airplanes. They were.
We took some pretty good, or our aircraft did, but some of them took off parts of the tail and so on. That's a crew.
There's your crew of 7, and you, I believe you said you're the one on the far left. Of that photograph. So about what year do you think this would have been taken? Was this in Vietnam?
This would have been 1966. And that old fellow there in the middle is the pilot, Harry Corbin. He was gung-ho. We'd be on ground alert and the phone would ring and Harry would run out to the airplane and I would be taking down the target information and you had to run to catch up to him because he was starting to taxi. And we had a little Vietnamese boy that was translating for us. He was a lieutenant.
Right.
And he didn't run as fast as we did, so we had to grab him and pull him in the rear door as we were going.
Right.
Harry was really gung-ho.
Right.
And he was a World War II veteran.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Several of the pilots we flew with were World War II veterans that flew the hump.
Right. Right, right. I want to talk about your relationship with the 13th Bomb Squadron and the Bomb Squadron Association, of which you are a member, and I believe you either are or were the first vice president of this association. It's an association that indeed has reunions. Talk about this association. I know it means a lot to you.
The World War II veterans of the 13th Bomb Squadron, which dates back to 1917, formed an association. That was a very close-knit association of World War II veterans.
Right.
They didn't want to accept the Korean War pilots and navigators into their group. We were welcome to attend, but the folks that did attend say they didn't feel like a part of the group. So in the year 1984, they formed the 13th Bomb Squadron Association, and it was all-inclusive of people from the Korean War era.
Right.
After a while, they began to realize that if they didn't include others, and people on active duty and so on, there would be no more 13th Bomb Squadron Association.
Right.
So in the year 2000, they had instigated with Congress and the Air Force. They stood up the 13th Bomb Squadron on active duty again at Dyess Air Force Base in Texas.
Yes, sir.
In the B-1 bomber. Last year, they did away with that. Again, Dyess closed down, and we went to the B-2 bomber at Whiteman Air Force Base, which is in Knob Noster. If you know where Knob Noster is?
I've heard of it.
It's
but you have to
outside of
remind-
Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful airplane. Everybody doesn't get to see it. We got to see it, and
Right.
climb in it, and look at the controls, and it's completely different than what we had. We looked out the window, looked at something on the ground, and that was our navigation, called eyeball navigation.
Right.
Today they set in coordinates and work a computer console and fly the airplane, but the most we ever flew in the B-57 was 5 hours. These guys fly 40-hour missions,
Wow.
and I don't want to do that.
I want to move along. You left Vietnam in January of 1968, and you married Fran in May of that year. I want you to talk about your wife and your family a little bit later. But when you left Vietnam, you were ready to get home. As a matter of fact, you could have stayed one more day and seen the Bob Hope show.
That's correct.
But you said, "Glad Bob is coming, but I'm going home."
That's right. I don't want to risk one more mortar attack. So I came home to the 44th 12th Combat Crew Training Squadron, which was training the new navigators for Vietnam. And the first person I met was an old friend from the 13th Bomb Squadron.
Right.
And he said, "Are you married, Brian?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, how'd you like a date?" And his wife was a widow, an Air Force widow, and they arranged with this young lady, this cute young thing that was also an Air Force widow who didn't want anything to do with Air Force people again.
Right.
Well, we got a date, and that was in January. And
that
then
was it.
in May, we got married. And we've lived happily ever after since then.
Indeed. I want you to talk about, you are very involved in with veterans, disabled veterans. Specifically, I know at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, you have taken some of these soldiers and given them a very special times in their life, brought them up to Texas A&M football games and other events. Talk about that, because I know that's important to you.
That is an extremely rewarding thing. When you see the eyes light up and the smiles appear, it's the best thing you could possibly be given.
Right.
I talk with Mike Caruso out at A&M in the athletic department, and the folks over there, and we set up a date and bring them to a football game or a basketball game, and it is really rewarding. The Bush Library gives them a tour before the game. we brought up a fellow, Kenny Adams, who was totally blind, and at the same time we had another fellow who had been blinded in one eye and was deaf because of an explosion in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And they threw out the first pitches at the baseball game for Veterans Day.
I remember that.
And Kenny really got into it, winding up to make the pitch and so on. While we were at the Bush Library before that, Kenny got to touch everything, and they gave him a real grand tour. He touched everything. He got on the mock-up of the railroad train, and he worked the controls, and he was really happy. And he's married to a beautiful young angel, I call her, the way she takes care of him and just leads his life. It's just wonderful. They now have a home in Houston, and the group that I work with, Salute America's Heroes, has made their whole home voice activated.
I'll be darned.
And I'm just
Wow.
gnawing at the bit to go down and visit him when
Right.
we're down there and see how this works, but it's fantastic. This group, Salute America's Heroes, is trying to raise enough money, and I'm sure they will, to give each wounded veteran a $500 check for Christmas so that they can buy Christmas presents and so on.
Well, good luck to that. I wish we could talk more about that, but believe it or not, we're out of time.
Oh.
It goes fast. I know there's a lot more to say, but thank you for your service and thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tom.
Brian Parker's official military service is behind him, but not his service to our military. It is his passion to make sure that veterans, especially disabled veterans, are able to grasp the best of the freedoms that they helped preserve. We salute Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker as we salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley. And not say anything. I'll do that. We're going to do the promo, and then they'll give us the okay to go.
Going for 30, Tom.
All right.
Thank you, sir. When you're ready, we're speeding.
Here we go. For a year and a half, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker flew the navigator seat in AC. Wait a second, I got to do that again because it was just a year. I'm sorry. Here we go. You can stop it. Okay, yeah, go on. I'm sorry. It was for a year. All right, here we go. For 12 months, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker flew the navigator seat in an AC-47 gunship in Vietnam. It was the attack plane that saved thousands of lives. You'll hear his story. You'll hear how he serves today's military veterans. Hi, I'm Tom Turbeville, inviting you to meet Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker on Veterans of the Valley. It's coming up Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.
Perfect on timing. Let's do one more for safety to demonstrate.
Okay?
We're speeding.
Okay. For 12 months, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker flew the navigator seat in an AC-47 gunship in Vietnam. It was the attack plane that saved thousands of lives. You'll hear his story and hear how he serves today's military veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville, inviting you to meet Lieutenant Colonel Brian Parker on Veterans of the Valley, coming up Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.
I like the first one much better. What do you think?
Yeah. That's fine.
Can you step out and stop tape?
All right. All right. He'll give us the go ahead and